Hello. In our last several lectures, we are examining the various dimensions of the organization and organizational functioning, structure, organizational effectiveness, the factors influencing organizational change, and how to manage through appropriate organization development interventions. We also looked at the group and the group behaviors. And one of the key aspects we need to understand to better manage the group functioning is to understand the conflict management and management of differences. In the last lecture we did explore different dimensions of conflict and how conflicts come about in the organization. As we go along, we also need to see the aftermath of the conflict as well as the conflict resolution. So in this lecture we will explore the following things. How can we look into the conflict in terms of the classes of conflicts? We can also see in terms of approaches to the resolution of conflicts and the steps what has been proved in different organizations in effective management of conflict, and also look at the positive aspects of the conflict, and we will dwell upon a little more on the intergroup conflict. As we stated that the conflict is inevitable part of existence. So if there is no conflict means there is no organizational life. As people pursue interest, as people have differing perceptions, as people have different needs, the conflict is what is given. How can we look at the classes of conflict? I think there is one way to see all of it is the individual conflict. That means we can explore different dimensions of conflict at the individual level. Another way to see conflict is at the organizational level. That means we are trying to see between the functions, between the departments, between the goals, between the ends and the means. So there are many issues which will come at the organizational level. And the third kind of a class of conflict to be explored with respect to the interorganizational, which can come between one organization and the other. Part of the mergers and acquisition, part of the competition, part of the union management relationships. So many of these things are put as interorganizational conflict. So we need to explore the classes of conflict and then see how to go about the resolution. See, the best way of seeing this individual conflict is the kind of dilemmas the individual experiences. The individual is not in a position to take a decision about certain matters. I think this is where it has been classified basically into three kinds of decision making situations. One called the approach kind of a conflict, where the individual has to make a choice between two positive things. Another one is the approach avoidance kind of a situation, where there are certain positive things and there are also certain negative things. So this individual faces difficulty in choosing a course of action out of various alternative choices available, and then it is either ambiguous or uncertain or unacceptable. Let us look at various issues what can come. One would like to join a college which is very close by, but teachers are not so good. So it is a kind of an approach avoidance kind of a conflict. So there are certain things are positive, certain things are negative. Or it could be that an approach kind of a conflict where the two disciplines both are very attractive. So many of the students have to choose between the two disciplines, let's say computer science and electronics. So should I go for this or should I go for this? Both seems to be very attractive. So as people see in their lives, there are many such situations where both the things are positive and one has to choose between one of the alternatives, or there are situations where you need to avoid one and then get the which is most preferred one. At the same time, in the organizational life, situations do come where people would like to avoid the two of the alternatives. So it is an avoidance kind of a situation. So the organizations, promotions, transfers, appraisals, performance, review, many of these things puts pressure on the individual, and then the individual has to make a choice. As long as the individual is able to make the choice, he is able to or she is able to cope with the conflict situation. If not, keeping those dilemmas means it is the individual is not able to deal with or cope with the alternatives, and then has to deal with the conflict. So the management can also help the individual in such a situation. One of the best ways of providing, helping the individuals could be by providing counseling services to him or to her. That's where that somebody can go to this counselor, or could be a mentor, or could be the boss, and explain the choices and explain the difficulties and get that required insights. A dialogue or a discussion or a communication or conversation between the two individuals always help to resolve that kind of an individual level conflicts. Individual dilemmas, individual difficulties can be addressed. The conflict, when you see, one can also elaborate, as you can see the cognitional level has been classified into these following things: inter-individual conflict, also called as interpersonal conflict, and also what we saw an intra-individual conflict, and then intergroup conflict, as well as intra-group conflict. So the intra-group conflict explains the differences, dilemmas, what happens within the or amongst the group members, and the intergroup conflict is the example of what happens between one function and the other, one group and the other. Let's see the details of each of these classes of conflict. We start with inter-individual conflict. Inter-individual conflict, as you know, happens because of the differences between the choices made by different individuals in the organization. The choices made, the interest pursued, the kind of perceptions, and also the kind of needs one has to win over the other, and all these things leads to this kind of an interpersonal, inter-individual conflict. Sometimes the organization itself creates a situation in which two individuals are placed in that kind of a conflict situations, where people have to compete with each other, and it is called as healthy competition in some situations, but it can also get converted into a jealousy, hatred, misinformation, and the misleading the other. So many of these things can happen as a consequence of the perception of the conflict between the two individuals. So the healthy or unhealthy competition defines the nature and the dimensions of the conflict. So the inter-individual conflict can also be called as a kind of an ego conflict, where people try and satisfy their own self ends at the cost of the other. So the inter-individual conflicts are so common in the organization, and unless the organization understands the causes and helps the individual to resolve this, it will only affect the nature of interdependence, and also it affects the overall organizational performance. Intra-individual conflict, as we have seen earlier, arises within the individual members of the organization, and it is basically the individual have experiences, as we talked about the approach situation, or an approach avoidance situation, or avoidance kind of a situation. It arises because of the incongruency between individual goals and the organizational goals. And the incongruency comes because the person thinks that he is overqualified to do certain things. Possible that the way he is thinking about himself, so that he thinks that he is more qualified and the job what is offered to him is not so good, so he thinks that, or she thinks one need not do such things with having such experience and qualification. Or it is possible that the individual feels that he should have been somewhere else. People think that I should have been studying medicine, but somehow I am there in engineering. So the people think that they are somewhere else and they are not really involved, not really charged, not really excited. So that's the time where the individual preferences, individual goals can get is different from the organizational goals. And the goal incongruency occurs because the individual feels that all his personal goals cannot be reconciled with the organizational goals. And that is where when organization tries to create motivation through money, but people would be pursuing some of their talents. And somebody may be more interested in music, some may be more interested in doing some social work and social service. And organizations, when they don't understand the individual goals and when they don't provide such opportunities in the organization, then the individual perceives that yes, he is there in the organization, and usually they give minimum level of contribution and do performance at the minimum level, or what is called as the punishment avoidance level, but they pursue their goals. They pursue their goals outside the organization, and that is where the unresolved intra-individual conflict affects motivation, affects involvement, affects the employee engagement in the organization. And the good managers try to see what kind of opportunities the organization provides, how organizational opportunity induces, builds that confidence and motivation, and one need to employ or understand these things at the time of selection, at the time of orientation of the new employees, as well as in placements and promotions. Unless you understand these, the kind of conflict which can come between the organization and the individual, and that intra-individual conflict which is driven by the perceptions, experiences not only within the organization but also outside the organization. So good managers try to analyze and have a view of the employee, what people call it as a kind of a 16-hour employee concept. In that 16-hour employee concept, they understand the individual in terms of 8 hours would go for his personal needs like sleep, etc. 8 hours he is there in the organization, and they try and ask a question, how is this individual spending the remaining 8 hours? What are his dominant activities and goals, and what is that individual is trying to pursue? So that means you are trying to understand the lifestyle of the employee. Once you understand the lifestyle of the employee, then you see the organizational initiatives, organizational functioning, which may cause that intra-individual conflict or the incongruencies. Once that incongruencies are explored and corrected, then the organization benefits, the individual also gets that required motivation to perform and contribute. Understanding intra-individual conflict is an important step in building groups, also in building and placing the right kind of people into the right jobs. Intra-group conflict is another level of understanding. The intra-group conflict arises because the differences over an issue can crop up between the members of the same group, and that is where it is talked about the intra-group conflict could arise in 3 ways, particularly when the group faces a novel problem. That means how to go about the problem, what is the problem, and what are the alternatives to deal with those things. So the group gets into that kind of an issue where should we increase more people, should we decrease more people, should we give more opportunities to one, or so many of these things, or should we sort out the problems through the technology. So the group gets into the discussion, and so the differences can crop up with every new situation, and that is where every new situation need to be understood, and the members of the group must be integrated. The group can get divided, the group can divided over the differences, or the group can also get integrated if a proper methodology is adopted. So the openness, the transparency, the communication, the nature of information sharing all becomes very important in handling this intra-group conflict. In the absence of these things, where people don't get the right information, people don't understand the choices before them, people also see that there are difficulties and challenges for some people and not for the other. Some people get overloaded or some people get underloaded. All of these kinds of situations illustratively create a problem for the group. So the group, whenever faces this kind of a new situation, it must help the members to have a right perception and generate appropriate alternatives so that group morale is not lost, group belongingness is not lost, and the performance and motivation of the members are always kept intact in handling the new situations. Also, when the new values are imported from the social environment into the group, so the conflicts do come when some of the leaders or some of the members are exposed to the new training programs or new experiences. When they come back, they question everything, whatever is happening in the group, and that's the time where the conflict can come. It could be the new management technique, or people have gone through world-class manufacturing or total quality management or new 7 management tools. So any of these kinds of things, when they are exposed, so they come back and then they start telling the people that whatever has been done in the past, not good enough, not good, and so some new things should be happening. When people try and bring some new values, again the organization faces that kind of a dilemma, and the group faces that kind of a conflict which needs to be resolved. And similarly, the third kind of a thing is when a person's extra group role comes into conflict with the intra-group roles. Particularly in the organization, people are asked to work in different departments. People also play roles which can go beyond the group interest. And the leaders, when they are asked to be a part of a task force, and the leaders are asked to work on budgets, sometimes they may compromise the group's interest. So, but they will be playing that kind of a dual role, and on the one side they have the interest of the group, on the other side they have an interest of the organization or some other group, and they experience the conflict of which one to support. And depending on the kind of decisions they take, the conflict can escalate or the conflict can get resolved or conflict can subside rather than taking some dysfunctional consequences. These are not exhaustive listing, but these are illustrative aspects of how intra-group conflict can come about. Similarly, there is the inter-group conflict. The inter-group conflict in the organization is so common, and good managers need to be seeing this, the nature and dimensions of the conflict. There is an existence of a positively felt need for always a kind of a joint decision making. In other words, there is some delay happening, sometimes the quality is not met, sometimes the correct information is not given by the sales to the production departments. So there is always a kind of a perception where they have to sit and discuss, or they have to take the decisions jointly. And if only one group is making their preferences, or if they are making the decisions, then normally it affects, and there is a perception of conflict, and the differences are bound to come. And also there is a differentiation of goals. The differentiation of goals of what is required by the organization. There are groups which pursue short-term objectives, and there are also groups pursue the long-term objectives. So the short-term objectives versus the long-term objectives. For example, human resource development may be asking for a set of people to be drawn for the training program, but the immediate manager is bothered about that day's production because he is accountable for that day's production, that week's production, and the kind of pressures he has from the customers. So then HR would feel it is their prerogative to draw people for the training program, and they think it is they have a higher purpose to achieve, and it is mandatory to everyone to go and attend the training programs. When they make such demands, some of the team leaders, the line managers, they don't understand this requirement. They perceive the day-to-day problem situation. Both are correct, but at the same time, one is perceiving or pursuing the long-term goals, and another is all about achieving the short-term goals. So that is where there is a differentiation, and there is a differences in perceptions of the goals, and also there are differences in perceptions of reality. Reality in where people are thinking that everything is fine, everything is great for the person who is already used to that kind of a condition. But any new manager, a newcomer would perceive, yes, things are not up to the mark or things can be improved. So there could be perceptions of the reality of what is it and what could be done. And that is how when managers change and when new managers come in, and they usually try and do many things in the initial days, it is because of the kind of perceptions what they bring, and they bring new perspectives and new perceptions. But the group members would be feeling pretty awkward because each time when a newcomer comes, there are new initiatives and there are many changes, and sometimes things are undone of whatever was created in the past, things like that, and it is bound to create that kind of the group perceptions. So the differences in perceptions of the reality between one group and the other can also cause the conflict, and also the inter-organizational conflict. The intra-organizational conflict to inter-organizational conflict, if you see, these are like contact between the two organizations. Normally the two organizations could be the labor and the union. Some very strongly believe that the conflicts between these two are classical. There is no way you can bring these two together because each one is pursuing the kind of interest which is not meeting but mostly leading to a kind of a parallel paths, or sometimes it is also giving a bound to the kind of a conflict where the gain of one has to happen with the loss of the other. And that is how the issues of the bargaining. So then usually they get into the kind of a bargaining process when they are co-located and coexisting. So the bargaining is a process of give and take. So the give and take can help for them to see the kind of a newer opportunities and coming together to meet and define some kind of a goals which are common to both the organizations. But the inter-organizational conflict can also come when the suppliers are not paid properly, or you don't have a strong process to meet the suppliers, and then the suppliers may get into their own methodologies of delay or not giving at the proper time for the things like that, which is resulting in a kind of a feud or in kind of a differences of when and what should happen. So the best is to sit and discuss and have that kind of a required conversation, and also create that kind of required processes so that inter-organizational conflict could be minimized. But there are certain situations where parties will not be able to meet, where there are intense competition for the same talent, intense competition to win over the other in a marketplace, and such time these conflicts are open and people play the conflict using all of their energy and pursue these conflicts to a kind of a win-lose kind of a situation. Some of these situations also leads to a kind of a cartel formation where sometimes they collaborate, sometimes they compete. but an understanding develops based on the kind of and nature and the dimensions of this interorganizational conflict. So, as we have seen, the conflict can arise at the intra-individual level, inter-individual or interpersonal level, intra-group level, as well as the intra-organizational level, as well as inter-organizational levels. So, inter-organizational conflicts, when they arise, these opinions or certain issues between different organizations must be understood, must be explored. So, data is required, problem has to be explored, alternative also must be generated. I think that is where we need to see what are the approaches to the resolution of conflicts. Robert Blake and in his book, Robert Blake and Jane Moulton worked very extensively, and they suggested the three alternative approaches to the problem in dealing with the conflict situation. One of the key things is what is the perception of the conflict itself, and then moving on to the kind of a resolution of conflicts. One of this is perception of the conflict is inevitable and the agreement is possible. So, that means you see the conflict cannot be avoided at all, but then agreement is possible. On this view, one may decide to fight it out, and so that means you may think yes, agreements are possible, but then one would go through that kind of the win-lose or a kind of a power struggle. One can also see this inevitable and also agreement is impossible, and that's the time where both the parties really fight it out, and you don't see any kind of a collaboration or the kind of a compromise. Another situation is conflict may be inevitable, but agreement is not possible. So, that's another kind of a perception. The previous one we saw that yes, agreement is possible, but here the agreement is not possible. On this assumption, the parties may decide to withdraw from interaction or become indifferent to the problems. That depends upon not only this perception, but also the kind of stakes involved. So, the conflict may be inevitable, but agreement is not possible, but at that time when the stakes are very low, then they could go in a way, okay, this is how it is, and so they may withdraw from the situation, or they may also become indifferent to the problems. But in stakes are high, they may also get into that kind of a compromising situation, that it may provide some temporary satisfaction to some and also the benefits to someone else. So, that is one of them may gain little more. Then one can also see the third kind of an alternative is, although conflict may arise in various situations, agreement is possible. So, that means you see, yes, you don't see it as so difficult. So, it is a part of the life, and then we need to work through. I think that's the kind of an attitude of both the parties to the conflict. So, this is regarded as the most positive approach to deal with the conflicts. So, that means both the parties perceive, yes, the situations are like that, the conflicts will come, conflicts do arise, but we don't think agreement is not possible, impossible, agreement is possible. I think this approach would make people to look for what people call, yes, let us put our thoughts together, let us share our concerns, let us put our alternatives, let us state the kind of interest we want to pursue, so that both the parties would recognize, yes, that there is a need to solve the problem. And once both the parties perceive, yes, we need to solve the problem, then they may also think about the rules of the game and then create a situation of give and take. So, the Robert Blake proposed this kind of a model to analyze how both the parties in a conflict situation perceive and how such perceptions influence the behaviors at different levels, and when stakes are high and when stakes are low, how some of these variations can come in their behaviors, and also whether the interaction level. So when interaction level is high, stakes are high, people will move into a very win-lose conflict, and then one can also get into a very avoidance or a peaceful coexistence, or sometimes mutually sympathizing when they are thinking that conflict is inevitable but solutions are not possible. Or sometimes they may also come to the solution, you go your way, I go my way. So get into that highly competitive mode, avoiding conversation, avoiding communication. Anyway, let's move on to that kind of a steps in the conflict management. And the steps are, as we have talked about in the past, one can see very clearly at 5 levels. The first is to analyze the conflict, then try to dimensionalize the conflict, whether it is intrapersonal, interpersonal, or intra-individual, inter-individual, to intra-group, inter-organizational, or intra-organizational. So try to classify where these conflicts are coming and what are the reasons. The reasons what we have talked about could be the need, it could be the perceptions of the problem, it could be the values what one would bring into the table, and whether it is the kind of alternatives they have and what kind of alternatives they are thinking as positive or negative. So then you need to determine the management strategy in terms of how you help the group, and then look at the pre-negotiation, negotiation, and the post-negotiation stages. So let's look at these stages a little more. And when you see this analysis of the conflict, the first step is to see the nature and type of the conflict. So this is achieved by asking questions to the groups, to the individual, to the members involved, to the parties. So ask the questions in different ways to look at what are the needs, what are the perceptions, what is that the feeling they have, what is the history they have. Now such things will help to look at various dimensions of the conflict. Once we have dimensionalized the problem, we determine the management strategy. So then we have to see how the conflict has come in terms of what are the people, who are the groups involved, and then select the most appropriate strategy. So most appropriate strategy is in terms of a compromise or a win-win solution. So ideally to move towards that, where both the parties to the situation gain from that conflict situation. So it may be necessary sometimes to have a neutral facilitator to help move the group towards the consensus. So that means it may take some time, it may take some effort, and if the person who is trying to help has to be a kind of a neutral facilitator, that means he himself or herself is not going to gain from the conflict situation, and also he is not aligned to one party more than the other. So that is where, so the neutral facilitator, may it be at the problem faced by the individual level, it may be at the group level or at the organizational level or between the organizational level, identifying that right person with whom you can share, without any inhibitions, with having that required trust, and also the perception about the other that he will not misuse the given opportunity, given information to pursue the interest at the cost of my own. I think such perceptions are very important, and that's where we are using this word neutral facilitators. Neutral facilitators are extremely important to suggest and build that required understanding, required consensus, and also the commitment towards the proposed action in handling the conflict situations. So as we go through that, then the conflict management strategies. The conflict management strategies are classified into the following 5. It is collaboration, it is the compromise, it is competition, it is accommodation, and the avoidance. This depends upon the kind of concern what one they have, and also the concern to work with the others, and that is the attitude towards cooperation, and what is that they perceive it as. So, look at the collaboration for example. The collaboration always results from a very high concern for the group's or self's own interest and matched with a very high concern for the interest of the partners. So, that means the concern for self and the concern for the other can be seen in collaboration mode into a very high. So, in a high situation of that is high concern for self and high concern for the other. So, the outcome is always win-win. So, you are not trying to get something at the cost of the other. Not only you are interested in getting something what you want, but at the same time trying to generate as many alternatives as possible to give as much to the other party. I think that is where it results in a kind of a win-win situation. So, the strategy is generally used when the concern for the others are extremely important. Let me give you an example of a human resource manager. In that company, they used to give what is known as a picnic allowance. So, the picnic allowance was given to every employee, and they were also given the day to go, all of them would have gone out of the company and would enjoy and come back. But they would go together, sometimes they would stay at home, but the picnic allowance was given, but also a day holiday was given to all the employees. But this was thought and reflected on this. So, in this situation only the individual is gaining, but not the organization. So, that means it was at the cost of the organization's days working that employees were enjoying. So, let us put this situation. So, one can come to the conclusion, okay, withdraw the picnic allowance, and so that there is no declaration of any holiday or anything, and compensate them in a better way. But that would mean the organization would gain, but the individuals would lose or the employees would lose. So, he started working towards a win-win situation by saying that, okay, now there is a picnic allowance, but instead of declaring a kind of a holiday, what he did was he credited them with 1 day of casual leave, 1 day of CL. So, that means they can take this leave at any point whenever they want, and also the allowance was there. So, that means on the same day not all employees would go on leave, and so there was generally the working day was obtained for the organization. So, there was never used to be a holiday, but also employees were also happy and benefited because they could use the day they wanted it. So, that means they do not have to force themselves on the day for that picnic day to go out, but they could choose depending on the kind of a condition and whenever they wanted. So, that way it provided a kind of a win-win situation. So, in a collaborative mode, the solution is to ensure that both the parties gain. It is also generally the best strategy when the societal interests are also at stake. So, this approach helps build commitment and reduce bad feelings, because you know that you are working exactly to the best of the interest and you are concerned with the other parties. But the drawback is that you have to get into the innovative solutions. It takes time, it takes energy, you have to collect data, you have to work with the other, you have to work on the emotional level, attitudinal level, sometimes at the values level. So, you need to work at different levels and work and understand the other party and understand the self, and then come up with an appropriate solution. So, some partners may take advantage of others' trust and openness. Sometimes in a collaborative mode what could happen is that one party may exploit the situation. I think one need to be much more generous in while working these kind of a collaborative solutions. So, they generally regarded as the best approach for managing conflict, and the objective of collaboration is to reach that kind of a consensus and the commitment based on understanding, based on the trust. Compromise is the other method. The strategy results from a high concern for the group's own interest, along with a kind of a moderate concern for the interest of the other partners. So this moderate concern is then you look for, okay, let us see what best we can do for you. So this is a kind of a compromise, some win and some lose. So I think some loss, that's how the perception is. So the outcome is not that win-win or win-lose, but for sure some win and some lose kind of a thing. So this strategy is generally used to achieve, to get into a kind of a temporary solutions, or to avoid some kind of a destructive power struggles, or when time pressure is there because you can't get through all the details and get into that kind of a consensus mode. So generally what is done is to get into some kind of a compromise to settle that immediate issue or the immediate problem. So one drawback is that partners can lose sight of important values and long-term objectives. So that means really you don't know what is that you have really lost. Sometimes you may agree to pay an extra amount because you have a high pressure from the customer. So now having given that, so every time when somebody wants to do more work, they are looking for more money. And after some time, the more money is taken as a matter of right, and people would like to learn more, and not only money but also there is a pick up and drop, then there are many more things to be done. So the question is, once you settle for a kind of a compromise, it may lead to some more complications to the future. So one need to see whether the compromise, does it build a kind of a precedence, and such precedences are going to dictate terms to the future. So the approach can also distract the partners from the merits of an issue and create a kind of a cynical climate where people know that I think here people are not very serious, I think they are trying to buy the piece and really not get into the issues of how to confront or how to deal with. So compromises always have these issues. The next one is the competition. So this strategy results from high concern for the group's own interest and with less concern for the others. And definitely the perception of the one party is that I know all, or I know what is best for the other, and the outcome is win-lose. Okay. And that means that is always my statement, my view, my concern is uppermost, and then you are asking the other person to obey, take it or leave it and accept it. And if you don't accept it, then there is a kind of a force. And similarly, the other group also runs it the same way. So in a competitive mode, people apply pressure on the other, people exhibit power over the other, and sometimes it results in that what starts as a kind of a win-lose can also result in where both the parties may lose at the end. So in a competitive kind of a thing, the strategy includes most attempts at bargaining. So it is used where when the basic rights are at stake, or to set a kind of a precedent. Yes, there is no prerogative. So no prerogative view, like there are some managerial prerogatives, and the union management relationships do come to this level where they can be highly competitive, not necessarily very collaborative. So then it can cause the conflict to escalate, and the losers may try to retaliate in different manner. Okay, I have lost this time, but let me wait for another opportunity. So people may build history to the conflict, and then each loss or each win does not mean much, because the winner will have always a new situation to be facing, where the other party can come with newer game plan. The other one is the accommodation. This results from a low concern for the group's own interests combined with high concern for the interest of the other partners. So this is where people would like to compromise on their own things. At their comfort level, they try and accommodate the other. It has been seen, most of the parents do this. So in a parental kind of an attitude, they don't mind compromising some of their own things, but to meet the expectation of the child or of their own children. But then it is the outcome is a kind of a lose-win, or sometimes it is a lose-lose, or it is also called as the yield-lose. So in an accommodative mode, really you don't know what is that you have left with. whether the other person is not in a position to understand what is that really you stand for. So that's the time where you may be thinking that the other person will think sometime, will always do some good at a later point of time. So that means in an accommodative mode, you do have expectations about the other. It may or may not come true. When such things don't come true, then the person gets disappointed. So this strategy is generally used when the issues is more important to others than to oneself. Then it is a kind of a goodwill gesture. Okay, it's fine with us. We really don't bother. If you get it, it is take it kind of an attitude. So it is also appropriate when you recognize that you are wrong. So then you are to want to cover. So the drawbacks are that one's own ideas and concerns don't get attention. So you may lose credibility and the future influence because the other person may take advantage of your accommodation and the such strategies. Another important strategy people do adopt is this avoidance. So this results from a low concern for the group's own interest and coupled with a kind of a low concern for the interest of the others. So then you think that there is no conflict at all. Why should we have conflict? So people take these kinds of a position and the outcome is lose-lose because you don't understand what is causing the situation, what has led to this level of breakdown and things like that. So this strategy is generally used when the issue is trivial and other issues are more pressing. So you try to ignore, you try to avoid. It is also used when confrontation has a very high potential for damage or some more information is needed. You are not in a position to take decisions. So the managers try to avoid the situation and then move on to, and such moving on gets into the issues at a later point of time. It is also one method of suppression, and when you suppress the conflict, one need to ask that question, how long, and also the statement is water will find its own level. So one of the drawbacks is that important decisions may be made by default and then run into issues. So we have seen this step. Next step is the pre-negotiation to set the stage for effective negotiation. So the groundwork must be laid. Then the following should occur prior to the negotiation, kind of an initiation, assessment, establishing some ground rules and agenda, organization, and further rules and agenda as you start evolving the discussion. Step 4 is the negotiation. While negotiating, one must be sure to openly discuss the interest rather than just stated positions, why people and not only what they are saying. Interests include the reasons, the needs, the concerns and the motivations, and the motivations underlying the kind of positions what people have taken. That is what is acceptable, what is desired, what is impossible and things like that. And also the satisfaction of interest should be the kind of a common goal, if not all the things but at least stated things. So one should concentrate on inventing options for satisfying the interest and should not judge ideas or favor any of the options suggested, and should encourage creativity, should encourage the more ideas and not necessarily only the end commitment. So the next point of negotiation is evaluation. Only after the partners have finished listing all the options, then should options be discussed, and all that should together, so which ideas are best for satisfying the various interests. So that means one should separate it really, the generation of ideas and also the choosing the best solution. And it is also good to have a written agreement. So where areas of agreement and disagreement to ensure common understanding. So a documentation is always necessary and helpful. So this helps to ensure that agreements can be remembered and also communicated clearly. So at any point of the disputes or anything, one can work back and see. And also the commitment is another dimension. Every partner must be confident that the others will carry out their part of the agreement, and all should discuss and upon methods to ensure partners do understand and also honor their commitments. Once the negotiation is complete, so the group will need to implement the decisions made, and some of the key steps include what are the kind of some ratification required, how do we check some of the things are implemented, and also create that kind of a procedure for this implementation. So the post negotiation things are this, but when you see all the positive aspects of the conflicts are, it provides a great opportunity for releasing tension which otherwise would remain suppressed at any level, intra, interpersonal, or at the organizational level. Conflict provides a vent for the feelings, and the thinking process followed by the conflict may lead to the innovation, and the innovation in policies, procedures and behavior. And also the conflict compels the individuals of a group to think again and again before adopting a kind of a course of action. It builds that kind of an energy within the group. Conflict also brings about the group cohesiveness, particularly among the members when they are working with or negotiating intergroup conflicts. It helps in identifying the weaknesses of the system where certain procedures and policies are not there. Conflict is also a kind of a test of capacities of the individual and groups, how much they can assert, how much they can negotiate, how much they can bargain. So the most important causes of conflict we have talked about is this: task interdependence, the goal incompatibility, the use of threats, then intergroup interaction, and also these win-lose attitudes. So as one can explore these task interdependencies, and then when the two groups depend on one another to accomplish their task, the potential of conflict increases as the degree of interdependencies increases. But interdependencies are well managed when the pooled or sequential or reciprocal kind of interdependencies are well understood and well covered. We have talked about this when doing the organizational structuring. So the structure and conflict management has to be worked together. So pooled, it occurs with additive task when the performance of different groups is combined, the sequential interdependencies as well as the reciprocal interdependencies. So these things with together one need to see whether A depends on B and whether the B depends on C or on each other. So what is it like? So that's where the reciprocal interdependence is to be understood. Similarly, the goal incompatibilities. So one need to see what are the incompatible goals for different organizations and where that incompatibility comes at the individual level, group level, or at the organizational level. And such incompatibilities also have to see. And further is this use of threats. The level of conflict appears to increase when one party has the capacity to threaten the other. So that means absolute perception that they have the power over the other. I think that needs to be corrected again between the manager and the subordinate, or between one group and the other, or between one organization and the other. And similarly, the intergroup interaction, where both groups are striving for the same goal and only one can obtain it, I think that needs to be corrected. So the equity within the organization has to be understood. So then we have to see as the group become more cohesive, normally they can deal with this intergroup things. Similarly, the win-lose attitude, the competitive kind of an attitude has to be seen with respect to how do they see the game as zero-sum game or otherwise. So it should not be that winning one group at the cost of the other. So in this, what we have seen is the following: the classes of conflicts, approaches to the resolution of conflicts, steps in conflict management, the positive aspects of the conflict, and also the causes of this intergroup conflict, and then we need to work through all this. But in the next session we will have a close look at the following concepts: creativity and managing creative processes, and planning innovation, and then approaches to the planning innovation, and planning techniques to the innovation processes.